Hey everyone, this is Joachim Comic Center, and this is yet another episode of Finding Fandom. And today we are meeting up with Laura and Scott from Married with Comics. And this is a particularly flattering interview for me, as Laura hit me up on email. One of the first that I think searched me up actually by email and said that, hey, we saw your episode with BJ Kicks and we think that we can add some perspective and value to your channel. And so there's no doubt, of course, I was going to talk with them about their perspective on the hobby. And it did not disappoint as we got into talking about I want to talk about the breaking the stereotype of man and wife hiding whatever they would purchase home to their collection, as several jokes in the past has tilted towards those types of jokes of just hiding your stuff from your spouse whenever you're getting it to your home. So how really does that look like when both sides of a party are into the same hobby? Not only that, but I had a lovely conversation with them, and I won't keep them from you any further. Here is Laura and Scott from Married with Comics. Hey everyone. Hey Laura. Hey Scott. Thank you for doing this with me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great that you're being here, as you are the first one that actually requested to be featured here on Finding Fandom, and not me just hunting people down. This is the ego talking a bit. I'm sorry, but I'm just glad that this has reached out to somebody and they actually felt that, okay, let's present our perspective in the comic book community. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. I love your Finding Fandom series, and I love that you're getting all these different perspectives, from the YouTube comic book community and from other communities as well. And I definitely wanted to see if we could be a part of that too. It was just a unique opportunity that I definitely wanted to reach out to you about.
Definitely. So I have some standard questions, since this is really a moment for me to really try to be a true interviewer and not only speak with people that I maybe have met up beforehand. So I'll just start off with the simple question of, how did you two discover comic books?
So for me, I am the youngest of four siblings, and my oldest brother, he's about 10 or 11 years older than me, was graduating high school, and he had been into comic books pretty much the entire time, as far as I know. That he was in high school. He and one of his best friends were big time into them. And I guess, graduation, they were either too cool or too busy or whatever. So he literally took 2 trash bags that were full of his and his best friend's comic books, handed them to me on my back porch and said, here you go. Do whatever you want with these.
You scared me with the trash bags.
That was my inheritance from him, I guess. And so inside, I dove in. I mean, at that age, I was 8, 9 years old. It was perfect timing. And I started pulling out everything and organizing it. I'm a bit OCD, I guess.
I totally relate.
Yeah. So I had to go through those massive piles and just pull all the same issues out and same characters. And when I started reading, I kept going all the way through high school. And then I myself got too busy in college and kind of went away from it, and then circled back around years and years later with Laura.
Yeah. So for me, I grew up with the X-Men animated series, and then of course the animated Batman series. So I had an absolute love for these characters, and I remember meeting a friend of mine who had a suitcase that basically he had filled with his comic books, didn't know what to do with them, and there were some X-Men in there. So I grabbed an issue that had Rogue in it because she's one of my favorite characters, and I tried reading it, and found out that you can't jump into the middle of an X-Men run. So I was completely lost. I had no idea what was going on, and he had no issues that at least were in order. So I couldn't at least read 3 or 4 to kind of piece it together. So I ran away and I gave the comic books until many, many years later when Scott and I had met, and he knew that, of course, I was a huge fan of a lot of these movies and TV series, and he had picked up a Zenescope title. And I remember him telling me how they had given a really unique twist on a classic story. And we were at Comic-Con, and I found a Zenescope booth. So, of course, I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm going to buy my husband comic books. So pulled him on over to the booth and was like, okay, you get to pick. It's going to be so exciting. And then I ended up grabbing a couple titles for myself because of some of the things that they had available. And they were also able to help me kind of find a nice jumping in point instead of running into the same issue I had before. And since then, it has been all downhill love for comics for both.
It's downhill, uphill. That all depends on how you look at it.
Right.
So I like the contrast of given comic books from a trash bag and a suitcase.
Suitcase, yeah.
Yes. Needless to say, we do not store our comic books like that.
No. There's a nice middle ground somewhere there in between.
Yes.
Yes.
There were no bags and boards involved in either.
No, not in the beginning. When I discovered that, it was like a whole new thing for the OCD, as you mentioned, just keeping everything in like peak condition.
Yes.
And so I think the first comic books I discovered were like in my dad's closets. It was comic books, I swear. And it was like social satire. And of course, every spine bent, twisted, sort of rolled up. Even old issues of the Phantom and such European comics.
Yeah.
And I think Spider-Man is one of my earliest ones. And also the X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman animated series, of course.
Yeah.
Like many born in the 90s, true origins to get into comic books.
Yes.
Definitely.
And let's see here. So I can see your shelf right behind you there.
Yes.
Looking real nice and organized. I can see all Marvel together, and then we have some. Let's see here, right behind Scott. Is that the DC books that starts off there, or
that's Zenescope?
Some of the Zenescopes.
There.
That's a Zenescope. Oh, I never seen that. That explains the white text on black background. Okay.
So that's Grim Fairy Tales, which was one of the first big Zenescope titles that I really got into.
That has to be the longest title on Zenescope, right?
I think it is, because I know it's one of their early, like their original
it's
storylines.
That one and Wonderland are the two big long
Wonderland.
titles.
Oh, yeah. That Wonderland was also one that I was very interested in the beginning getting into comic books, but I never picked any up. I'm sure there were paperbacks that I could have gone for, but as you know, there's so much content.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Wonderland is one that eventually I did start grabbing, and that was one I started grabbing over at Comic-Cons. But because the concept is that there is no time, yet there is time, you can jump the reading order. So
nice.
That one, I love it because I'm actually not a fan of Wonderland as a story in general. It was too kind of convoluted and weird. But then you kind of add this horror serial killer element to it. And now suddenly I'm like, I'm in.
That's why I love the Madness Returns games.
Yes.
Like that nightmare twist on it.
Since you mentioned it, the book that she was talking about that I originally recommended to her was Jungle Book.
Nice.
So you take that series of, Mowgli that's been done in live action and animation and Disney versions, and give it to Zenescope, and I love what they did with it. It's one of the first times that I actually read like a plot twist where A, it wasn't predictable, and B, it engrossed me enough to like believe in that version. Like I wanted to find out what happened to those characters, as opposed to going, oh, well, that's cute, but that's not the Mowgli I know. That's not the
exactly.
So this one really drew me in. And that's the one that I recommended to her at the beginning. That kind of kicked it off.
Yeah. And so we do have DCs over here. So we did basically DC, Indies, Marvel, and then Zenescope on the bookshelf.
Very nice. And with all that, this is not an attack. That's how I protect this question. Do you know how many books you have?
Trades and single issues, somewhere in the 3,000.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Range.
Oh, if you count the single issues, then.
Yeah. So
Like I was thinking 3,000 collected editions. Get out of here.
no.
Okay, in unison also. Perfect.
Well, and I will also say the single issues, I kind of do a variety. So a lot of times I'll go to like a warehouse sale, or I'll go to like a dollar bin, and grab a title that maybe I would not have picked up before. And then I will just sort of grab a couple issues just to see if maybe this is a character that now I'm interested in. And if I don't care for the character, then I'll just pass along the series to someone else. So we do have a lot of titles like that it's just kind of dabbling and seeing what we think.
See if there's something for me.
Yeah, 3,479 total, but that includes single issues. So
and trades and
and
like I said, the dabbling.
So would you say that you're more into single issues, keeping it up with what comes out in the week-to-week basis, or would you say that you're more into collected editions? I mean, even the numbers doesn't necessarily have to speak for.
It's really split. So I do two things basically when I'm shopping. I look at artwork strictly from an artwork viewpoint. Yeah. So if it's a cover on a single issue that I may have never read before, and I really love that artist, or it's just something about that art, that cover appeals to me, I will buy that, perhaps with no intentions of buying previous or the ones that come afterwards, just for that cover. So a lot of my single issues that I buy are strictly from an artwork perspective. There are also certain artists that I follow religiously, like if In-Hook Lee or J. Scott Campbell start doing a cover on a book that I may have never read any of the others on, I will grab their covers of it to have their artwork in single issue format. Then when it's a really good story, like I definitely want to get that collected issue for Dark Knight, for Frank Miller's Sin City, for Watchmen, just there's certain tomes I think that you can't just, well, you could if you had a lot of money, but there's some of them, especially that older, that are so highly valued now, that the only way I can get my hands on the story is to buy the collected editions. And I do single issue runs now, mostly of like my favorite characters, honestly.
Like Batman, Spider-Man,
Daredevil.
Yeah.
Nice top 3.
Yeah, and then I kind of do independent runs as they come out. Like Once in Future is an indie title right now that I couldn't wait for trade. It's so engrossing, and they end it so well, each single issue, that I've been subscribing to it, like waiting with bated breath for the next one to come out. And Noctera is another indie title right now that we're doing single issues on for the same reason. It's such a good story. I'm like, I can't wait for the trade on that. When's the next one?
So for me, I kind of do similar. So I typically will grab issue 1 and maybe issue 2, and I'll just kind of see if I like the title enough. If it's good, but it's not kind of gripping me to that level, then I know I will grab the trade, or I'll rule it out and say, well, I don't really need to grab the trade on this, and just kind of pass on it. But then if the title just grabs me, like Noctera, Nice House on the Lake, Geiger, there are a couple I will be grabbing the whole run because it's just that good. There are some of them that I will sometimes have the single issues and then eventually get a collected edition, like Stray Dogs. We have the single issues on that one. We read it as it was released and love that series. But there's talk about eventually doing like a hardcover collected edition that'll have all the horror variant covers in it, would maybe have the Free Comic Book Day and the Dog Days kind of collected into one. Yeah. Like that I would definitely want.
Yeah, an upgrade to that. Would you sell the previous then, or would you just add on to the stack?
I don't know. It depends.
So for me, the artwork pieces I buy with no intention of ever selling. I couldn't care less what they're worth down the road, because I want that on my shelf. It's something that I want to have around. It's inspiring. It's beautiful. Whatever it is about it that made me buy it in the first place, I want to keep that. But I will say, like, if it's a single issue run of something that the trades special in some way, and the single issues were just like a really good story, but the artwork doesn't really do anything for me, I'll sell those in a heartbeat to get the special edition or the collected version that's got maybe, variant covers in it or something like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll justify it in my head of, well, if I can make a profit on the singles and then I can get the collected edition to replace it, but then I can also get the collected edition of something else that I'm really interested in, then sometimes, I'll sell the singles. But I try not to just buy something for the resale value, just because I know we're going to talk about FOMO. It's sometimes you get a return on investment and sometimes you don't. So I try not to buy just with the intention of flipping it, just in case I don't get my money back. So I'm like, I want to have something that I'm interested in reading first. And if I'm able to flip it, great. But if not, I still at least enjoy the story or the artwork.
Because otherwise it's just gambling, right?
Exactly.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Geiger, which is, I thought that would be the title, and it probably could have been, but I never called up my comic shop. But Gary Frank and Jeff Johns on an indie title, I was thinking this can go however they want. And it was almost the title that brought me back into single issue comics, because the last titles that I pulled was just simply The Amazing Spider-Man, Detective Comics, and Batman during the Rebirth era. But I got out of it when I moved away for 2 years. And I was thinking, no, I can't. And but who knows? I think Geiger will finish off before I can get a hold of it. So probably a collected edition there as well, but I really hope they do a hardcover treatment. I, of course, have gone into full collected edition mode, and I'm trying to because as you can see with solicits, there's always the next stage and the next upgrade on collected editions.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is your preferred collected format, would you say? If not single issues.
For me, it's hardcovers. I don't always prefer the omnibus, so I like the library edition or just the special edition hardcover. Part of that is because with the paperbacks, they're great if you can get them at a bargain and you're not sure, about a title. But a lot of times I'm always worried about, the bending and they don't always kind of hold the spine and protect that as well as a hardcover. But the omnibuses, sometimes they're harder to take with me. So if I know I've got a doctor's appointment, then I can just take a quick hardcover with me, or I'll put the paperback in my purse, and then I'll be waiting in the lobby and I'll be kind of flipping through my book. Yeah. For an omnibus, it's just not as convenient to sort of take with you on vacation. So those I tend to avoid unless I can't get the full storyline in some other format, where sometimes the trades in the hardcovers are harder to grab and it's just easier to grab a full omnibus.
Sure. Yeah, and I would second that. The only thing I would add to it is that, again, if it's an artist in particular that I like, I will look for a gallery edition, because I like seeing the prints in a little bit bigger size, or much bigger size, depending on which gallery edition it is. But yeah, omnibuses so far at least are the one that we have probably not. We definitely haven't focused on, and we have the fewest. Because we typically are going through. Well,
and we're reading a lot of them. Yeah. So if it's harder to read, then we're not typically grabbing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned gallery editions. That is something that I, at one point, wanted to dip my toes in. I just waited for the right edition to be released. And I think the first one where I really thought that I would dive into it, but shipping books over to Scandinavia would maybe double the cost on that book because of their immense oversized. But the Frank Miller gallery edition of The Dark Knight, and also a companion to that, almost, the Jim Lee Hush architect book, I think, because whenever I researched Jim Lee, he always referenced to, I think it was John Byrne and Frank Miller when it came to his own artwork style.
Yeah.
And I could really see that when reading The Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. So, and Jim Lee, of course, being my greatest inspiration when coming to my own type of drawing. Not that I'm really close, but sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's something that the biggest books that I managed to delve into is the omnibus, and that keeps me plenty occupied. And that's also why I don't dive into as much single issues, because I have 40 or 50 in just one book, so I have plenty to catch up on.
Yeah.
And I know several other people do too. So yeah, it's all about this managing what comes in and how much gets read and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
How's your backlog? That's a question I never ask. It feels like such an invasion asking
No,
that.
it's not an invasion. The reason I'm sighing is because I'm always talking about my reading list. And I've got like the reading list of titles that are single issues that I've grabbed, one or two of those issues, or I've got like the latest Geiger issue is sitting in my reading pile that is really high up. I just haven't read it yet. Issue 6. So I have those kind of single issues that are constantly coming in. Then I have the backlog of the other single issues of series that I've been, like I said, dabbling in, want to check out. Yeah. Then you have the, paperbacks, collected editions that I'm dying to read. Then you have the other list of titles that I'm like will be purchased in the near future because it must join the collection. Then you have the list of amazing recommendations that have come in. Like, I really want to check this out. So the 3 different reading lists just feel like they grow every day. And I don't think I'm ever going to get caught up on any of the 3. So that feels a little like I get caught up and then suddenly I hear about a new title. I'm like, oh, I gotta grab that. And then it just kind of adds itself to another list.
So, to be honest, I think that's kind of the conundrum that we have, especially with the channel. And I don't know if you've experienced this as well, but for us, the amount of time that we have is obviously limited. And then right now we're dividing between, regular, full-time jobs, and then our quote unquote free time is split between channel and the videos and the editing and the process that's involved in that and the time that it takes to do that and to come up with the ideas and the content. And then part of that is, well, we've got to do the research and the reading and the preparation for whatever that topic may be. Yeah. But then we also have just what I call recreational reading time that we're trying to get into like our backlog. And then, that's not counting family, friends, socializing,
exactly.
Anything else. And we don't have the time to do everything. So it's kind of working the balance of, sometimes for us, we do a lot of things like even before we got into comics earlier in our relationship and our marriage, we were very seasonal. So like we love Halloween. Favorite holiday for both of us is Halloween. And there's a certain time of the year over here where the weather starts to change and it just kicks in that feeling and you want fires in the fireplace and you want candles and you want all the spooky movies and you want the Halloween edition, you want Batman Ghost Story, it all ties together and you're watching Grimm on TV and Sleepy Hollow and that kind of stuff. So we would go through that season and then we would carry it on out throughout the rest of the year. Now with the books and the channel and the other stuff, we're still kind of wanting to do that. With like right now we're preparing for videos that we'll be doing in October where it's got a horror theme. Yeah. But then that takes away from my weekly subscription reading time.
Exactly. So you have to kind of pause that.
Almost, to be honest, I feel like I'm working nonstop. So like you do your schedule, you have your 8 hours a day or whatever it is that you're working at your quote job. And then I come home and I'm like, okay, well, from this time to this time, I have to read this to prepare for tomorrow's video. And then after that, throw dinner in there somewhere or something.
You have to eat.
That, I'm going to do this section and I'm going to read this book that I picked up this week that I can't wait. And then after that, I've got to do something. And it's just blocks of time throughout the day and it never stops.
Yeah.
Okay. So time is something that I brought up a lot of times on the channel. And I made one video called Time is Money and All You Have Is Books.
I love it.
And that was, with that, I'm glad you take it that way, Scott, because I was thinking that I would be such a downer or maybe too harsh on people that would have read that title and watched that video, because I felt so cynical on that you have simply too much. That's how I felt and reflected on the books, because I used to have like 50 books backlog. Now I'm maybe at 10 or 11, but that's on purpose because I know that I can scratch off that many books in the month that I read. But now I simply go by it by having reading marathons. So I know I'll get to those books eventually and scratch them off. And I don't get as much books in anymore. I maybe get 2 or 3 books in per month. So by simply reading more than that per month, I know I'll get everything read eventually. But I mean, and we're gonna get into FOMO and everything, but with the huge backlog that you get, there is the time aspect of it. And if we, in the video, I mentioned that if we looked at our books as the way that maybe some collectors would look at their collected Blu-rays or DVDs or TV series of movies and everything with timestamps on the back of them.
Yeah.
Where you would see how much time it would actually take to watch that series or movie. What if our books not only did have the page count, but also the approximately time it would take for an average reader to finish it all off? I mean, and Omnibody mentioned this, that, I mean, every hour you take to read is, I guess, potentially an hour you could take for work and earn money if you're freelance, I guess. But I mean, it's all in this balance.
It is.
And you can't get enough of any of it.
So I think one of the solutions that we've come up with, at least most recently, and we did kind of hit a wall, I think, within the last few weeks, we limited our pull list to the weekly titles, like we mentioned earlier, that we're collecting that issue. We're collecting every single issue of this run, and got rid of some of the ones where we were thinking, well, we'll try it, and if we like it, we'll keep going. We're just waiting on the trades on those now, or collected versions of them. But we cut that back a little bit to help. And then the other thing that is really kind of our end goal, I think, we're trying to invest enough time to really be able to be successful enough with the channel, and to that turns into not just a hobby, but perhaps that becomes our quote unquote work. And if that ever happened and that marriage happened, yes, it's still going to be a demand on our time, but then that equation that you just mentioned of, well, we're spending an hour reading, we could be earning money for an hour, turns into, well, we're spending an hour reading so that we can earn money from that hour that we've spent using the channel or using other means. Right now, it's a possibility only, the balance, because we have opposite schedules, to be honest. So it's like one of us is I work overnights, she works during the day. So when I'm at home and during the day and asleep, she can read and do whatever because she kind of wants to keep, be quiet or whatever. When I'm at work, she's normally asleep, or it works out to where we're never sitting together at the same time going, normally, what do we need to do with the next hour? She has her list, I have my list. And then every now and then on the weekend, we manage to get some time together. Now.
This makes me appreciate this interview so much more. You should know that, guys.
Yay. Well, and the other thing, with the fear of missing out, I mean, there's always going to be those titles that you want to grab. But the other thing that I've been doing, so we mentioned it, just a minute ago, that we're planning ahead for October because we love Halloween. So we're going to share that with everyone. So I've already pre-prepared different theme videos to talk about, vampire comics and zombie comics and different things like that. But I at first, when I was thinking about, which titles do I want to cover? I thought about a list of another 15 comics that I wanted to buy. And I'm like, wait a second. And I paused, and then I looked at our bookshelf, which is full. And I'm like, wait a second. How many of these comics do I already have? And how many of them have been on my reading list that I haven't read yet that are literally staring at me every day? So I changed the list. And I was like, if we can get it, in essence, for free here at home, let's talk about those. And suddenly I've my plan was to find 31 titles for 31 days of Halloween. And I actually had to cut titles off of that list because we had so many.
We had more. Yeah.
So it was an easy way for us to kind of take something that's, again, we bought it because we were excited to read it, and now it's kind of giving us that very specific reason to do it. But it does kind of force you to change the mentality, because absolutely, I would love to go buy another 15 titles. I mean, who wouldn't? But it doesn't mean you can't appreciate what's also sitting right here, and maybe those could be the great title that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So is that your official answer to the question we have down here? What is your best advice to control the fear of missing out? Because I love the idea, of course, of appreciating what's already there. Yes. Look what you have already, instead of the latest hot book that is coming out. And have you even read all the books that you have already and enjoyed those? Because if you're just looking forward, you're missing out on what's already behind you.
Some of it, I mean, we've already sort of answered a little bit, so I'll be brief on my answer on this. Is I think part of it for me with the FOMO is, if you go online, everyone's talking about, the latest key issue, the latest comic book, you got to grab this particular cover, go, go, go. And you, of course, run into that every single week as we get more titles being released. Yeah. And some of it, I have to narrow down and say, listen, is this a title that I would grab anyways? Then sure, no problem. But if this is a title that I'm grabbing a character that I've never been interested in, would never buy normally, but I'm only grabbing it because of something, it's going to be this hot issue, is that really worth it if I never ever get my money back from it? So that's where I've had to kind of make myself take a step back and say, why am I buying this? And
Excellent.
Is it really worth it? So I've had to kind of do the step back like that.
Very good.
Yeah, I think to add to that a little bit, when I first got back into comics, I based pretty much most of my reading choices off of things that I was already familiar with, either from that initial introduction, like my brother's, hand-me-down collection had a lot of Conan, Daredevil, Doctor Strange. There was a mix in there, but some of those main characters that I was first introduced to became my favorites, and I went back to them. But I also went off of a lot of, the pop culture, the movies that had come out. The Tim Burton Batman series had been out. The X-Men series had started, back in cinema. So I kind of tried and dabbled in a little bit of that just to see what the comic book versions were. And what they had become. And based off of kind of like my core interests, as I got back into it with Laura, I mean, I expanded my horizons quite a bit with the indie titles, but I still have my go-tos. And I kind of look at it as, there are some characters out there that are being redone, revamped, new storylines going on. But if you look at the current craze, like the future state for DC, I'll just pick that as an example.
Yeah, sure.
We literally went through in our local comic shop. We purchased mostly based on covers, but again, we purchased like the first issues of 6 of the 10, maybe 6 of the.
It was the Wonder Woman 84 covers. So we were grabbing those, and almost all of them were in issue 1 of a different Fear State title.
But we read issue 1 of each one of them. And out of the 6 to 8 that we bought issue 1 of, we only continued with 2.
Yeah.
So it was easy for us to just say, you know what, it may be the next great thing, but these 4 we weren't really interested in. I don't know what's going on, or for whatever reason, we just stopped. We stopped with issue 1. So we may experience another way that we kind of control this fear is, even if it's the best hype and PR that we've heard, we'll do a digital copy. Yeah. If I look at the digital and I read it and I like the artwork enough, or like the storyline enough, then we'll go out and we'll purchase it and maybe subscribe if it's that good. But we can do a digital copy for 99 cents, and be introduced to whatever's going on, and then decide if we actually want to pursue it, or if we're just going to pass on it completely, or we're just going to wait for a collected version of it.
Well, and the major events, so Fear State, King in Black, Fear State that's starting now.
Yeah.
As soon as you see that list that goes through, okay, in order to appreciate this event, you must purchase these 20 to 30 comics.
32 books.
As soon as I see that list, I'm like, no, we will get a collected edition. and we will then be able to read it in order. We'll then be able to kind of catch all the different sub stories, because sometimes those big event stories are phenomenal, and sometimes they let you down pretty severely.
Meh.
So I've definitely leaned a lot more towards collected editions, especially for those, just because you go out and you buy 30 comics and then you start reading it and you're like, wow, was that a mistake?
I can totally see that. And I totally see your point in maybe keeping up with the monthly and weekly titles on maybe Batman, Spider-Man, or a general title there. But then when it comes to the event, rather buy the collected editions, because as you said, because they're trying to implement you to start buying more titles, buy those crossovers, but then instead just wait out a few months for that collected edition. I think you really take back some money from them, even if you like it or not.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely found like the Joker War.
The Joker War Saga
recent
hardcover, so it included all the spin-offs in it. That one was great.
Nice.
It's much easier to read that collected edition than to try and find all those individual storylines. And I'm like, nah, let's just wait.
I haven't read that far. I've actually haven't even finished off Tom King's run, because I'm very much waiting for that last and final deluxe editions. Come on, DC. I mean, one more. And otherwise, I'll pick up the paperbacks because I want to finish off that run. But I'm also trying to find an ending to my characters at some points, because they're never going to publish the end of Batman or the end of Spider-Man. You'll have to find your own. I think people have realized that by now.
Oh yeah.
And but then after I have that sort of mainstream ending to the canon Batman, if I find it worthy, that is, I can sort of pick and choose whatever I would like to pick up thereafter, I think. And if, of course, that would interest me more, then I guess I'll have to go back into the hunt again. But for now, I'm pretty mellow about the current runs and everything. And I'm not speaking bad about any run because I don't read it. I don't know what I think about it. So,
yeah.
But
I would agree with you, though, because Batman is one of the single issues that I've been collecting. And the most recent thing with the storyline involving some of the new characters, I was kind of like, come on, this is a bit drawn out, but it was leading up to something, and I'm like, it'll maybe get there eventually. Now that Fierce State Alpha is coming out, I'm interested because Scarecrow is one of our favorite characters. Yes. But I also am like, you better pull all the stops out, because the Peacekeeper and some of the other stuff that you were doing building up to this kind of fell flat in my opinion. So I'm still collecting the single issues because it's Batman. But as far as from a reading viewpoint, I'm like, I can wait on that. Let's wait on that. There's other stuff that's really drawing me in. I want to read as soon as I get it. That stuff that I'm reading and then like setting aside, it's lower on my priority list because of the storyline right now. It's kind of leaving me a little wanting. But still collecting it.
Still collecting it.
Collecting it.
With my Batman tattoos, I never thought that I would cancel Batman. I'll tell you that. My friend didn't believe me either when I told him.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about this. Also, I have to give praise to your name, Married with Comics, because I love that TV show. It may not have aged as well as any other TV shows through the time, but let's keep it in that capsule, and it's just phenomenal.
I agree.
Married with Comics. I mean, speaking about that, just breaking the stereotype of having your spouse share the same hobby and interest with you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that too often within the YouTube community. You see it, but I mean, you made a thing of it with a name and everything. And I mean, YouTube must have seen the thing with, like, I got this box home. Hope my wife doesn't see it.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. I mean, that it's like the driest humor out there, but everyone has tried it.
Yeah.
How does that work in this household?
So, okay. there are funny stories involving that, of course, because
if you can give me one or two.
Oh yeah. So technically, Scott and I shop differently in general, and then of course, when it comes to comic books, we shop differently. So I am the bargain shopper. I am the Ollie's person. I will wait until like the super sale, and then I'll add a coupon on top of it, and I'll be able to be like, "Look, I got this huge stack, and I only spent $45." And that's like my pride and joy to be able to do that. And I also love like warehouse sales. Let me dig through back issues. Like that is my home. Scott, on the other hand, like he'll be really good for like a full month, and then suddenly he'll come home with a stack and be like, "Honey, I talked to Dan over at Ultimate Comics, and oops." So the good thing though is whenever, like for me, whenever I've got shipment boxes coming in, we don't hide it because we're both just as excited when we start like.
No, of course not.
Files.
I never expected that any one of you would hide the collection from each other.
It's definitely like when one of us gets to the shop on Wednesday, it's the show and tell of well, what did you find?
Well, honestly, sometimes too though, like from the shop, I'll be sending her pictures and just double checking, be like, "Is this one you wanted? Hey, did you see this?" And then she'll typically, so even when we're not physically in the store together, we kind of shop together. Like I'm checking in at the same time. But the good part about it, and I guess to speak to what you were describing earlier, which is more common, unfortunately, it's not me like, "Hey, is it okay if I get this?" type of stuff. It's like, "Hey, I already know what I'm getting. This looks like something that you would be interested in. Do you want it?" And because we're able to share that, I think it makes it richer for both of us because it's not a guilty thing. You know, there's no like, "Oh, no man, hiding. Buy this. I'm going to have to ask forgiveness later." There's none of that. Mm-mm. It's more of a, "Man, this is going to be awesome. She's going to love this." And the two of us play off of each other's differences too, because there's series that she's way into that I haven't even touched yet. And I will see something in the shop that makes me think of her. It may not be something I'm interested in, but because I know that she's, into that particular writer, artist, storyline, whatever it is, I know that I can grab it. And it's almost like you get little mini gifts, I guess is what I'm getting.
Exactly. Because
so it's like I get to present this to you in a way that I know you're going to be happy with it. Never a feeling of like, "Hey, is it okay that this?" There's never that.
No.
The only time that we've ever had a problem, honestly, is when we go to a con.
Oh.
And it's strictly from the viewpoint of, again, it's not like, "Oh man, she's going to kill me," or "Wow, I wonder if he'll be okay with this." It's more of I really want that, but it costs X amount. And if I get that, then she's going to feel bad if she doesn't get the same kind of something in that same price range. And I don't want to burden her with that guilt of like, "Well, you spent $200 on that. I'm going to get this. And I passed this up because it was $200. So we will circle back around and be like, we'll split up. We'll come back together and I'll be like, "Hey, come over here and look at this."
We do that a lot.
Check out this Loki print. It's in a frame. It's really cool. It's $200, but hey, what do you think about it? And if she's like, "Oh, well, I like that, but come over here and look at this," and she shows me something else, then we go through the debate of, all right,
which one
do we really want? Is it worth it? Can we find it somewhere else? What we go through all that
the
research
bargain shopping
and
but I mean, what you're talking about, that's something that any partnership really should go through when it comes to a big purchase. It doesn't just involve comic books or statues or printed posters. And when you were talking about just going into the comic shop and then just sending a pic of a comic book or title or writing about, saying, "Hey, this is something you would like." The only way all of these other guys that are watching these interviews can relate is like when we're at the store and like buying groceries. "Hey, do you want something tonight? There's a new Ship flavor here."
But I mean, it's true though. It is because we do the same thing at the grocery shop too. Of like, "Hey, what are you craving tonight for dinner?" But it's been a ton of fun. And one of the things that I really like, which was part of the beginning of this, when Scott was talking about the Jungle Book, is we'll be sitting there in bed and we'll be reading, and he'll start snickering, and I'll be like, "Well, what was so funny?" And so then we'll start talking about the story, and half the time we'll be reading a title and we'll be like, oh, you're going to love this. And then as soon as I finish it, then it ends up on his reading pile or vice versa. And then we start sharing characters.
Oh God, it will never end.
It never ends, but it's not all bad. So like he was a big Spawn fan long before I had even heard of the character. I tried the animated series and I couldn't get into it. And finally I'm like, let me try the comic. And I started reading the comic and now I'm a Spawn fan. And that's one of the runs that I'm trying to complete is Spawn, which I'm like, that's going to take me years and I have no problem with that. It eventually will work on individual issues of Spawn because I love the artwork, but that was one that Scott never years ago would have been like, Laura's going to be a big Spawn person.
No, I wasn't surprised. You kind of mentioned something though that I want to address real quick if I can. I never really thought about, like, when we do this and we present, and we were talking about doing this from the very beginning, we never really thought about it as presenting it in a hey, look at how unique that we are fashion. It didn't dawn.
I mean, you're natural. I mean,
well, because, and I guess what I'm like, we enjoy it so much, we want to share it with other people in hopes that they enjoy it as well.
Of course.
That's it. That being said, you brought up something I hadn't really thought about, which is that maybe a lot of the viewers are out there saying, man, that would be nice. I wish my wife wasn't on my back about this, or my, whatever, significant other. So at the same time, I want to speak to that real quick. I would only suggest one thing, and this is actually what Laura and I did. Find out what your partner's interests are, regardless, outside of the world of comics, outside of the world of literature, outside of whatever. Find out what their interests are, because if you can figure out what it is that interests them in that thing, then you can find a way to share your love of comics, graphic novels, whatever it is, with them in a way that they'll relate to. Now, whether they jump on board or not and become a huge fan, they may at least be able to understand why you are in a better way, and then it becomes less of a contentious point. And I say that because, like, as an example, Laura loves good storytelling.
Yes.
Great writing. It doesn't matter what it's about. If it's a movie, if it's a comic book, if it's a sports team, right? If you can present the story of a person on that team to her in a way that entices her, she will watch the game, because she's then relating whatever it is that she's seeing on the screen to the story of that individual I told her about, or of that she read about on her own. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it started with the comics. Like, it became more about the stories that I shared with her within. And then from that viewpoint, she went into the books herself, and she found great writers and great stories of her own. And it turned into the monster that you see before you today. But I had no intentions at the beginning either of being like, I love comics and you're going to love them too. Or I'm going to make it okay for me to love comics because this is why I love them. I found out what she liked, and I tried sharing that with her in my realm. And then it turned into what it turned into on its own.
Yeah.
Scott, I think that's some of the best original advice we have gotten here on Finding Fandom. So thank you so much for that.
Well, and it's also part of the reason why some of the videos that I've done have been focused in on women in comic books or getting women into comic books, because there are a ton of stereotypes with women in comic books. And my Rogue example is part of the reason why it was easier for me to jump into an indie title, because you don't have to go back and reread so many different runs of Batman and Spider-Man. You can just start with issue number 1 and end it with issue number 10. And you've got a complete story, which is really nice. So it was easier to jump into indie titles, but it doesn't mean that as a woman, I only read indie titles. And that's one of the stereotypes I hear. I hear that women are only interested in like a fluffier topic, that women are not going to like horror and suspense. And I'm like, no. I've heard that women won't read anything with sex and violence and nudity. I'm like, wait a second. All women watched Game of Thrones.
I was just gonna compare it to movies and TV series, because all of those genres are involved within comic books as well. So just pick any genre that you like in movies and jump into the comic books. And if it's Marvel, DC, or Image, doesn't matter. As long as you find the type of story that you like.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the few other, we met a married couple
we did.
in our shop, and actually we started a conversation because Laura was on the hunt for a hardcover edition of Witchblade. and the wife is the one that was like the huge Witchblade fan, and she got her husband into Witchblade, and it was kind of the reverse of what you would think stereotypically would have happened. But it's a perfect example of what Laura just said about the stereotypes are most of them are false. You just got to get in there and really experience
and
it.
Give it a try.
Yeah, give it a shot.
Yeah. So let's say we dipped our toes in this. So you did used to visit the annual Comic-Con convention.
Yes.
When you go into the Comic-Con convention, what is the first type of booth that you go to? What are you looking for?
So this year I approached it a little differently because some of my favorite comic book artists and writers are going to be there. So I got to meet Joelle Jones, which was like just amazing experience.
She totally fangirled out on her. It was hilarious.
Like we got a chance to meet David Tennant like a couple years ago before Comic-Cons ended, and Scott went like total fanboy. He went speechless. And I was still able to talk to David Tennant, no problem. I asked him my question, got him to sign something. It was great. But then I go to meet Joelle Jones, and like my voice went up an octave, and I started talking super fast, and it was just like, it's Joelle Jones! Oh my god! So yeah, I totally fangirl out. So this last one, because she was going to be there, I was like, I was interested in the other booths, but I knew that like we were going to end by meeting Joelle Jones, so that was a little different.
But you also you beelined it
straight to Miko Sawayan.
Yeah. Awesome. I was going to ask about Joelle Jones. Do you think she'll remember you?
I mean, I would like to pretend that she will, but
very possible.
I have no idea.
Well, and because you presented her with the gallery.
Reach that octave again, and that's you.
Yeah. Yes. So, and I mean, I had brought the poster portfolio that had just been released from DC with all the covers.
Those
and actually,
really nice.
she didn't know that it had been released yet.
Yeah, she hadn't seen it yet.
And she also didn't know which covers they picked.
So she might remember us for that, if not your octave high voice.
it always seems like they never tell any of the writers or artists whenever they're collecting anything of their work. As soon as they got it to print, that like, this is ours now. We don't have to tell you. Nada.
Yeah. That was very much the impression we got from her. And speaking about it, she's like, yeah, they don't normally even ask me anything about the prints they're including. She's like, I find out later with the rest of the world. So
yeah. So, but in a normal Comic-Con, we typically will start with the artist booths and just see some of the unique content that's there, and then we kind of work our way across the convention, eventually over to the stars and the panels, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, we tend to just kind of take a look and see what's there, because we've purchased a lot of things at Comic-Con that we never walk in the door being like, I'm going to walk out with custom chopsticks. And we have like the coolest chopsticks I think I've ever seen in my life. One of them says Asio Sushi for the Harry Potter. One of them says I was Groot.
Yeah.
And they're wooden chopsticks.
No.
Yeah.
So like things that they definitely make us laugh. I'm like, so you'll find so many unique things that we tend to do that.
Yeah.
Oh God, I was so slow on that Groot joke, but still.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think too, with us in the cons, we always kind of look at it for the chance to meet the creators as much as the creations, so their books and their all kinds of pop art and stuff that more mainstream, I guess you would say. But here I love going and meeting the cosplayers. You mentioned, you're interviewing cosplayers as well on this channel.
I definitely want to have some here. If there's anybody that is cosplaying and is watching this interview, hit me up. The mail is in the channel description.
And I'm going to send you a couple of recommendations as well. Some people that we have met that may be very interested, and see if I can put the two of you in touch.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Scott.
Yes. I love that creative aspect, and it's something I've always aspired to, but probably could never do myself. And so getting to meet them and talk to them about how they came up with their costumes, how they did their weaponry, what got them into it, to me is fascinating. And to stand across the table from somebody that, you may have seen on a YouTube channel, or you get to see the end work, but you don't get to hear the story behind it all the time, is one of the reasons that I go. but we kind of look for the uniqueness, the smaller, the mom and pop shop that started doing, steampunk watches and stuff, and we look for the more localized. But a lot of the people that have been coming to the one we typically go to every year are coming from a little bit broader area. It's growing a little bit, so it's not just necessarily people that are right here that are in the community. We get people from multiple states. The furthest away, I think, so far that I found, as far as a booth of people that were bringing their own stuff to sell or to show, it was Minnesota.
Yeah.
Which is not close. It's 12, 14 hours away from.
Oh.
So, I mean, that was a haul for them to make it there. And we like to kind of divide and conquer too, is the one thing I was going to say about the cons. So we have a game plan, thanks to my analytical wife over here.
Yes.
She has a certain thing she does on the first day. She'll kind of price shop. And second day, we kind of hit more of the panels, and because it's very busy and crowded on the floor. And you can't really maneuver as well. And then the last day, she goes back and tries to bargain and get her purchases on the best possible price from everybody.
Well, and a lot of times by the last day, I'm like, if I still like it's nagging me in the back of my head, that's when I'll go back to the booth and just kind of nose around. By this point, they've seen me there enough that a lot of times they'd be like, well, if you'll get this item off of my hands and I don't have to ship it, bring it back with me.
Exactly.
I'll give you a 2-for-1 price, get both of them out of here.
Yeah.
But, the other thing that we used to do a lot at conventions is before Comic-Cons were kind of put on hold for COVID.
Of course.
We would go to Comic-Con every year or twice a year typically, and we would kind of stock up on all of our graphic novels.
Yes.
And that's where I would get a ton of these Zenescope books. And then we would read through them, and then by the next Comic-Con, then we'd stock back up on another set of graphic novels. But when Comic-Cons kind of stopped, then we lost that huge comic community. So we then started kind of tying into our LCS at Ultimate Comics in Raleigh, and we then found the comic book community there, and it had to sort of change, but it wasn't a bad change. It was just sort of expanding to a different level because Comic-Con wasn't there anymore.
Shifted genres on Facebook groups now, and our channel as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, shifting the crowd, shifting the area and everything, but discovering other solutions also.
Yeah.
Because I think it was Omnibody that mentioned that constraints creates creativity, I guess.
An opportunity, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, some things have turned to the better because when we're in this confined area and everything, and we have to find different solutions to our problems and so on. Yeah. And definitely, I think several people have discovered that they have local comic shop by this. Of course, some of them has also been affected by the pandemic and everything, but I mean, everybody has moved their eye to something else by this.
Yeah, and especially at the beginning of COVID, when a lot of the shops either could not be open or they were open but for limited hours, and they had to put so many caps on things because of the initial outbreaks. And we saw a lot of small businesses in our area that had to close down. So that was another reason why, as soon as Comic-Cons were gone, we were like, we don't want to lose another comic book shop.
Exactly.
So we were very heavily like, let's support local. Let's make sure that the comic book shop, the traditional idea of being able to go in there and talk to someone doesn't go away. Because I love online shopping and I love bargain shopping, but it's not the same experience that you get when you go into a comic book shop.
Yeah. So much more than just 2 clicks on the screen.
Definitely.
So let's see here. Speaking about the channel and everything and how you came into the comic book community, what is the best thing that you think about the comic book community?
So for me, there's 2 different sides to it. So there's the other YouTube channels. So actually, I got started because of a great friend, BJ Kicks. He had started his YouTube channel. We were friends. We're both in the same, area. So we're both local. We were both kind of in the same comic book groups online, live shows, etc., that we were both participating in. And then he started his YouTube channel. And of course, we were all trying to support him when he was starting out. And at one point I reached out to him and was like, well, have you thought about getting a female voice on your channel and just having maybe a guest star? And he was the one who turned around and said, well, why don't you consider doing your own channel? He's like, I think you have enough, content and interest, and especially from your own unique perspective, why don't you try it? So I did. And then we sort of expanded it then to, Married with Comics. And it's been incredible to have his support from the beginning. But then we also have met other great YouTube creators like yourself and other, people within this community that, all of us have eventually gone to YouTube. So there's that side of it. And then, of course, you have the people that are, participating, commenting, and that side of the community as well, who've been incredibly supportive. And it's been great to hear, their favorite titles. And even on stories that I may not enjoy it as much as they do, when you get a good person in the comment section who can disagree with you, but then you can also still agree to disagree and have a good conversation about it. I love that. So that's what we actually try and encourage, is we don't mind it when someone disagrees with us, especially about so many different titles. But we want to encourage that healthy debate of, well, why are you so impassioned about, Batman versus, some other great, hero? Which one is your favorite and why?
Yeah, I would only add to that I think it's really helped us expand not just our kind of our own perception, because of course you have your perspective on things based on your particular background, your history, or your environment, and it broke down that wall to where now we're being influenced as much by the people that are commenting and actively engaging with us on our channel as we may be influencing them. So we have another YouTube subscriber who we made a comment at one of our videos that we had not really been able to experience much manga yet. It was always the part of the cons that we were always very curious about, but just lost in. Like we would walk into a booth and be like, I have no idea what any of this is, but it's really cool. We would see the costumes and be like, oh, that's awesome, but I don't know who that is. I have no clue. But he heard the comment and he sent us several titles as like his recommendations of jumping in points. And they're awesome. I gotta say, we loved it. And it's one of the things now where we look forward to that interchange, not just because, it provides an outside voice that we may not have heard from before, but because it's broadening our horizons, not just beyond our likes, but now beyond countries, obviously. It's interesting to hear perspectives from Europe and from the UK and from Asia, and not just be limited to the world as we know it within our bubble here in the United States and our comic fandom here.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, you are influencing as much as being influenced by your comments and everything. And that going back to FOMO and everything and affecting people and showing this is how it could be, because that is the perspective I think one needs to keep, is that this is one way to do it. And I mean, everyone is eventually your neighbor thanks to the internet and everything.
Yes.
So instead of just looking at the Johnson's house next door,
right?
Johnsons are everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Joneses is saying, I gotta get a hold of my American phrases.
You're doing great.
Yes.
Let's see. This is a question that I haven't brought up in too many of my interviews, but if there was a book or title that you would wish would be universal available to anyone that would be interested in comic books, and that you would wish would love a book just as much as you would, which title would that be, or story? If any?
So this one was a really, really tough question, and I've struggled with it to come up with the perfect answer. But honestly, I boil it down to the one comic that, in my mind, kind of turned me on ahead. Because before I'd read Zenescope titles. I had read other comic books, but it was the first time that I'd gone into our local shop and said, give me something that is not superhero title, and just tell me what you have. And I basically walked around with the shop owner, and he just started grabbing titles, and he started making recommendations, and he'd give a quick little sales pitch. And one of the titles that I grabbed was Witches by Scott Snyder. And again, before I'd read that book, I would have told you that when it comes to like a true suspense story, you either needed like a Stephen King novel, you needed that full description, and you needed to really have that drawn out storyline and paragraphs to really feel the suspense.
Lots of prose.
Or you needed a film. You had to have the sound effects, because without the sound effects and the visual, you weren't going to have a true suspense storyline. And then I picked up Witches, and I sat there on the couch and I literally paused long enough to eat to then run back to the couch to finish the book. And I completely consumed it, and it was the first time that something had drawn me into a story that perfectly, where the characters were so well done, the suspense was so well done, the jock art was just perfect. And there was just something about it that drew me in and immediately made me sit there and realize that a comic book could do more than I ever imagined it could, because it didn't need to have a special effects budget. It didn't need to have a perfect casting call. You could achieve so much more in those panels than me beforehand would have said, oh, well, no, it has to be done these certain ways. So titles like that, that's what I would want people to understand, because it breaks some of those misconceptions.
That's nice. You almost got me interested in Witches, which is really nice. I was thinking, oh God, backfire. Now I'm gonna pick up this book.
You should definitely read it.
I'm definitely interested now. I'm definitely interested.
Yeah.
How about you, Scott?
So I had trouble with this question mostly because I was trying to think of like the word that caught me was like universal availability and understanding. I'm like, wow, that's a tough one. I think ultimately, though,
just that you hope that someone else would like this just as much as I do.
So, and you mentioned that at the beginning when Laura and I first started talking to you tonight, and I was thinking before that of one way, and after you mentioned that, I changed my answer. My answer now would be probably out of the X-Men series in the run, and there are a lot. But the House of X and Powers of X run, and the reasoning behind it is it's not just another timeline crisis or another case of good versus evil. It really gets into a lot of issues that I think are important for us to understand as a comic book community. But more importantly, like you mentioned, the Joneses are everywhere. I want our neighbors to understand that from us, and that it's talking about the differences between us, and it's magnifying those differences in a way that I don't think the series kind of delved into, and before the X-Men characters have touched on multiple times before, even in the movie versions they touched on when they went into a little bit of Magneto's background and they showed some scenes from his childhood, right? But when you get into that run, they specifically kind of draw out the fact that, look, we've been persecuted for our differences as mutants. We've been together. We fought against each other. We are now here. We're not going anywhere. We now have more control than you ever wanted us to have. You've done multiple ways of trying to control us that didn't work. And we're now an independent nation, separate. And we also have something that we're willing to supply to you and open up trade, right? It touches on so many key elements of what we see in the world, period. Now, it's throughout history we've seen it. But even more so, I think, in recent history, because as you mentioned with the internet, the globe shrunk now. So there is like one world. If you wanted to fight it in the past, I'm sorry, you lost. We are kind of one world. There's so much availability now of information, whether it's good or bad. There is so much. It is so easy for stories to be spread, again, good or bad. And that influence that you can have on somebody around the world, whether it be positive or negative, it's tremendously powerful. And this storyline, I think, ties into that in a way that if we all read and understood it, whether we all agree with it or disagree with it or not, I think it could draw some people's perspectives down into a broader focus, maybe, and less narrow-minded. And maybe then we could actually get some positive things going globally that right now we're struggling with. I mean, we flat out are. We always have, and we we still struggle with it today. And that book for me kind of made it a little clearer.
Fantastic. And I've read House of X, Power of X also, so I really know what you mean with it. And thank you for that answer, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. I have a couple of more standard questions, and then it's a wrap. How would you say, what makes you a comic book fan? Is it simply, I read comic books, therefore I am, or is it something else?
So for me, as Scott was talking about before, I'm all about the characters and that storyline, and I love how you can kind of disappear into the art and the writing. So for me, anytime that a story can almost just take me to another place like that, whether it's another world, concept, I love that feeling and that sense. So for me, I get excited when I can't wait to read the next, new Witches. What's going to be the new title that's going to expand my experiences within comic books in a different way. Whether it's going to be some of these bigger titles or if it's going to be an indie, is it, or manga. I've just read Death Note Volume 1 very recently, and that was awesome.
Nice.
So there are a lot of different titles that I think are constantly sort of expanding my experiences and my appreciation of comic books in general. And the more I read, the more excited I get about the next title. So I don't think that there's ever going to be a point where I'm like, okay, I found the one that I've been looking for. It's got the perfect combination of this, that, and that. I never have to read another comic book. And I think that drive to constantly look for more, it's not a fear of missing out. It's more I love this experience so much. I appreciate these stories. And I also can't wait to share it with someone else. So that to me is some of what makes me a fan.
For me, it's unlimited creativity. I mean, the fact that you have so many people involved in the production alone of a comic book, from inkers and pencilers and artists and writers, but also the fact that it's unlimited in what you do. It could be historical, educational, futuristic. It could be bleak and sad. It can be sunshine and rainbow. There's so much potential for the comic book industry, period, just to take any direction. That's why I'm a fan of it, because I think it sparks that creativity inside so many different people from so many walks of life in various different ways that I think some other, creative forms may not. I love paint. I love artwork. I'd love to be a painter. I will never paint anything worth seeing in my life. So I don't dabble into that. And I think with comic books, though, there's such an unlimited potential that there's the possibility, at least for more and more people, to really be involved in it, whether from the production side of it, the artist side of it, or just the fan side of it, that I think that's what makes me a fan. I love it.
Yeah.
Nice. And my second question, my follow-up to this one, it could be, it could look like this one, depending on how you see it, but how would you describe your fandom? Because this is really what I drive this whole thing about with interviews. If it's the same thing as what makes you a comic book fan, just tell me. But if it's something else.
I'm thinking.
It's something else for me because beyond the written, the printed version, we're also big time, like we'll follow individual artists and individual writers, but we also expand that to, like, there's an ongoing debate in this house over the Batman movies, just the Batman movies.
Yes, there is.
The original movies, then the Dark Knight series, the upcoming ones they are coming out. There's the Justice League. We have a fandom that is involved. Beyond comics expands to the point where we will get in arguments over whether or not the director's cut of Star Wars includes something that should be there or not. We will get in arguments over whether or not this character would have ever acted this way within the Harry Potter realm. And we're big time Harry Potter fans as well. So our fandom is much bigger than just comics. In that way, I would say it's different is my answer, because it expands into other areas that we are just as passionate about.
Yeah.
In multiple ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the things that I also appreciate about most comic book fans is most of them are not so hyper focused on comic books that if you mention The Princess Bride or Harry Potter or some of these other things that we're all fans of, but they're not always a comic book, that people either immediately they recognize the title or they're like, oh my gosh, I grew up with that story too. I'm a huge fan. So yeah, we definitely have that. And yes, I am the storyline purist that I am definitely the one that's like, no, if you're going to write it this way, then you need to do and you got to include this element. And yes, I am very harsh on George Lucas with the prequel Star Wars trilogy. So I will try not to go into my Jar Jar Binks rant, but yeah.
You don't have time.
That's a whole nother show.
Exactly. So yes, but it's still fun and it's still good natured, that we can have these kind of debates and I think everyone has in their own mind, like their Batman, the one story, just like the Joker. There's like the one in your mind where like that was the perfect, video film, interpretation of these characters. And we get so impassioned about it, but it's still in good fun to be like, no, it will always be Jack Nicholson versus Heath Ledger. It's fun.
I think our fandom in one word would be creative people, creativity. That's really what we look to include. That's what we admire. The only characters really I have trouble relating to in any genre, whether it be comics, movies, or whatever, are the kind of the drone worker bees. Like I'm not knocking that lifestyle at all, because there are people out there that fulfill that role, and that's their comfort zone. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I can't relate to it, because to me, I would think I would go nuts. I would struggle so hard just to be like, point A to point B all the time, and just everything on a schedule, and eat the same food like that to me would just be the death knell of me, period. But so the creativity, we want to surround ourselves with it. We look for it in other people. We look for it in our activities and our entertainment, and we love celebrating it.
And I think it's part of the things that we like about Comic-Con is that you see whether it's carved wood art, you see paper art, you see chainmetal, steampunk, and I mean all of it technically fits in this world of comic books, but you can express it in so many different ways, and I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love how everyone can sum up their fandom with one word.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So one last question, the easiest one tonight. Where can people find you?
So we are on YouTube, Married with Comics. We are all that in a bag of chips. We are also on Instagram, and I believe on Instagram we are Married with Comics NC. So there are links within both, to send you from one to the other. Within YouTube, we do, a variety of different videos. So of course we do our pull list video to kind of talk about the titles that are coming up that we're looking forward to. And we do talk a bit about those collections that are coming out, or we'll make recommendations whether this is a good title, but wait for the collection. Or there'll be some that will say, this is the one that we can't wait on, like Nice House on the Lake. You'll hear me talk about how excited I am for the next issues. But we do those. Then we do a lot of comic book reviews. And then we also we've done a lot of interviews. We try and offer a different variety because there are so many different aspects of comic books. So we try and bring that to the channel. So we've interviewed authors, writers. We've talked about Kickstarters. We've talked about, printed titles. We want to give everyone within kind of live shows. We want to try and give all of us kind of that behind the scenes look of this is the process. So just because we see a live show, and we see they pull up, 300 titles, what kind of work goes into that, and research to make sure that you're providing a balanced show to then draw people in. So that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And of course, I'll provide links to your Instagram and YouTube channel down below in the description so people can find it right away.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute ton of fun, and we really appreciate you having us on.
It's been very cool.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing this. And for all of you that are watching, check out the links down below. This has been Joachim Comic Center with Married with Comics. We'll see you in another video.
Have a great day.